Welcome to another deep dive. This time into a historical crossroads that, honestly, still sparks debate, even today. The trial of Joan of Arc. Now, you give us this book by Raymond Arcel, Il processo di condanna di Giovanna d'Arco.
The trial of condemnation of Joan of Arc.
Yeah, and even before we crack it open, that title kind of gives away the ending, right?
Oh, absolutely. It signals that this wasn't really a trial seeking the truth, you know? More like one designed to get to a specific outcome, condemnation.
Yeah.
And that raises questions, big ones, about fairness, about objectivity, especially when you consider the whole context of Joan's story.
Okay, so for those who maybe need a quick refresher. France, 15th century, smack dab in the 100 Years' War, the country's in turmoil. And then, bam, this young woman, Joan of Arc, she comes out of nowhere claiming, like, divine guidance to lead the French army to victory, no less.
Right.
We even have those striking images of Joan, armor, banners, leading troops. It's powerful stuff, visually. Really shapes how we see her, even now.
It does. Those visuals are really fascinating. We should definitely come back to them. But let's start with the trial, the condemnation trial back then. Very specific process.
Okay.
Imagine this. You can't call witnesses to defend you, and the judges. They've already decided you're guilty.
Oh, wow.
That was Joan's reality.
Essentially a kangaroo court.
Yeah.
But, like, with fancy legal dressings of the time, right?
Right.
And don't forget the politics. We're talking an English-backed court putting a French heroine on trial. This wasn't just like a legal thing. It was political theater.
Absolutely. 100 Years' War is raging. Joan's the symbol of French resistance. Condemning her. It's a way for the English and their allies to try to demoralize the French, solidify their control.
That's a great point, because she was a threat on all these different levels, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she was a military leader, challenged English authority on the battlefield, but also someone who's those claims of divine inspiration, well, they potentially undermine the authority of the church itself.
Exactly. Challenge to the status quo, politically and religiously. And that leads us to one of the most serious charges, heresy.
Right. And that's where things get really interesting. But to understand how serious that charge was, we got to understand, like, what heresy even meant back then.
Yeah.
It wasn't just disagreeing with the church. Heresy was like a threat to the whole social and spiritual order.
Yeah. Immense power the church held, maintaining that doctrinal unity paramount. So claiming direct communication with saints like Joan did, dangerous territory. It challenged the idea that the church was the sole interpreter of God's will.
So Joan's claims, even if she genuinely believed them, they go against the whole power structure. It wasn't just about being personally pious. This was about the structure of power in that society.
Exactly. Helps explain why that charge of heresy was so central. It was a way to discredit her, to undermine her, and control the whole story around what she'd done.
And we can't forget the cross-dressing thing. Joan insisted on wearing men's clothes.
Yeah.
Battle and during the trial. Seems like, I don't know, a small detail now. But back then...
Huge deal. Clothing wasn't just fashion. It was about social order. Visual reinforcement of hierarchies, of roles, defying that transgression against God, against society.
So another example of her rebelliousness, her challenging the norms. Further evidence, maybe, of those heretical beliefs.
The court was looking for anything, any evidence to support that condemnation. They decided that from the start. And Joan's attire, her words, her actions, they were all seen through that lens.
It makes you wonder, was there anything she could have said or done differently? I mean, even her responses at the trial, so defiant. There's this one part where they ask her if she's in God's grace, right? And she says, if I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me. I mean, that takes guts.
It does, and reveals something about Joan. She's intelligent, a quick thinker. She doesn't answer directly, which they could have used against her, but she also, at the same time, asserts her own righteousness, challenges that simple image of her, as just this divinely inspired peasant girl.
It does challenge that image. She was like actively engaged, right? She was navigating a very dangerous situation strategically.
And don't forget, she was illiterate. Significant disadvantage from the start. The court was a world of words, and those words were what they used to condemn her.
It's almost tragic, isn't it? This young woman thrust onto the world stage, leading armies, claiming divine guidance, and then trapped in a system designed to silence her.
It is, and it highlights how power can be used to manipulate language, to control the narrative. And it underscores why, as we delve deeper into Joan's story, we got to consider the biases built into the source material. We have to. And we also can't forget,
Yeah.
this trial, it wasn't just some isolated thing. Major event, international implications even. We're talking backdrop of a war that had been raging for generations, basically.
Because how this played out could have shifted the balance of power, right?
Yeah.
In the 100 Years' War. So Joan's trial, it's not just legal stuff, not just religious. It's about controlling territory, resources.
Exactly. France and England, locked in this brutal struggle. And Joan comes along. Stunning military victory. She becomes the symbol of French resistance, resurgence even. Condemn her publicly, dramatically. Huge win, symbolically at least, for the English. And their Burgundian allies.
Burgundian allies. Remind me who they were again.
Oh, right. So Burgundians, they're French nobles, but they've sided with England and all this.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It wasn't just a trial. It was like a message, propaganda.
Exactly.
It's fascinating seeing how all these different layers connect, inform each other.
It is a great example of how something that seems, isolated in history, it's often tied to these bigger currents.
Yeah.
Conflicts. And it reminds us, to always think about those in power. What were they hoping to get out of this? How did it serve their interests?
So you have this young woman, a teenager really, going up against these powerful figures with their agendas and all that. How did she handle herself during the trial? I can't even imagine the pressure.
Well, based on the trial transcript, she was remarkably composed, defiant even. Think about it. Weeks of interrogation, relentless pressure to recant, to submit to the court. Yet time and again, she holds firm, declares, "I believe firmly what I have always said about my visions and revelations."
Wow. It would have been so easy to just cave, say what they wanted, just to, I don't know, survive. She refused to back down from what she believed. That's real strength, isn't it?
It is. And it's important to note those claims of divine guidance. They resonated with a lot of people back then. France was hurting. People were desperate for, I don't know, a savior, someone to deliver them from this war, this never-ending conflict.
The Maid of Orleans, saving France. Powerful. Tapped into what people were already hoping for, fearing even. What about public opinion? Did people buy into the accusations, or were they still on her side?
Hard to say for sure. No opinion polls back in the 15th century, unfortunately. But we know she had a following, especially after those early military victories, and that popularity probably made her even more of a threat, to the powers that be.
It's that classic thing, right? The establishment versus the charismatic outsider, shaking things up. And with Joan, the stakes couldn't be higher.
Couldn't be. And while she might have inspired hope, fervor even, among people, in the end, the court found her guilty. It makes you wonder, looking back, could it have gone differently? What if she'd played their game, recanted? Maybe she could have, escaped.
Yeah, it's tempting to think, what if?
Yeah.
But like you said earlier, history, it rarely plays out in simple ways. Still, it's clear the political climate, the way the trial itself was set up, that heavily influenced the verdict. Can't really call it a fair trial.
No, not at all. It was a political trial disguised as a religious one. And for Joan, well, the outcome was pretty much decided from the get-go. They weren't trying to figure out guilt or innocence. They were trying to get rid of a threat, send a message.
Let's shift gears a bit. Talk about those images of Joan we mentioned. We touched on it earlier, but it's worth going deeper. You said the pictures of her as a warrior, the armor, the banner, all that's contributed to how we see her today.
They have. Those images, especially the ones made after she died, they were key in building up her image. The courageous leader, the symbol of French national identity, and eventually a saint even. They really show how powerful visuals can be, how they shape how we see historical figures. Often they overshadow, even contradict the real messy lived experience.
It's like those images become the whole story.
Yeah.
Even if they don't show everything. And you said the way she was portrayed visually, it actually changed over time.
Right. The early ones, they focused on Joan the warrior, emphasizing strength, determination. But then later, especially after she became a saint in the 20th century, things shifted.
Yeah.
More spiritual, more saintly.
So from warrior Joan, resisting the English, to Saint Joan, embodiment of piety. That's fascinating. What caused that shift, do you think?
It probably reflects how French society itself changed. The the warrior image, appealed to a nation trying to be strong, independent. Later, when France became a more secular republic, well, the saintly image, it fit with people looking for spiritual guidance, national unity, even without a king or queen.
So you're saying these figures, they get, like, reinterpreted to fit what each time period needs.
Exactly. Reminds us to be critical
Hmm.
of how history is presented, visually and in writing. Who's creating these images, these narratives? What are their motives? What might they be leaving out or emphasizing for their own reasons?
Which takes us back to what we were saying about those trial records.
Gotta be careful.
You got to realize they're products of their time, often reflecting the biases, agendas even, of whoever made them.
Right. Critical thinking is key. Always be aware of bias. Look at things from different angles. Be willing to question your own assumptions. Just because it's, written down or painted a certain way doesn't make it the whole truth.
It's all about going deeper, peeling back the layers, understanding the context, recognizing what's not said.
That's what historical inquiry really is. Not just memorizing names, dates. It's about a conversation with the past, trying to get why people did what they did, and using that knowledge to inform, to help us now.
We've gone over the trial, the charges, the whole political and religious scene, but there's this big question right at the heart of it. Were Joan's claims of divine guidance, were they real?
The million-dollar question. And unfortunately, history can't give us a definitive answer. We can analyze what we have, consider psychology, culture, and we form our own interpretations based on the information that's available.
So it's like a mystery, but that doesn't mean we stop searching, right?
Yeah.
Just got to get comfortable with not knowing for sure. Embrace the complexity.
Exactly. And that ambiguity, that's part of what makes Joan's story so interesting. It makes us think about those big questions. Faith, the role of individual belief in shaping things, and how much power one person can have to challenge how things are.
I'm kind of leaning toward believing her. That conviction. Facing death rather than deny what she experienced. Hard to dismiss that as, making it all up. Where do you fall on that? Do you think she really believed she was talking to saints?
I understand that. And it's important to remember, nobody ever said she was lying. It was all about interpreting what she said happened, not whether it did happen, believe in divine stuff or not. She had this inner strength, this conviction that let her do what she did. No denying that.
It's crazy how all these centuries later we're still captivated, still debating. Why do you think she's still so compelling?
It's the power of the story and the questions it raises. Joan of Arc remains, in a lot of ways, an enigma. We'll never truly know her. But that's, I think, what keeps us coming back. It makes us keep questioning, keep exploring, keep trying to understand this remarkable woman and her world.
We've covered so much in our deep dive into Joan of Arc's trial. We've talked about the politics, the role of religion back then, even how images shape how we see her now, centuries later. But there's one thing we haven't really dug into yet.
Oh, and what's that?
Joan's own words. We have these trial records, right? But can we trust them? It was her accusers who wrote them. Do we really get to hear Joan's voice through all that?
That's a crucial question. Gets right to the heart of, how we interpret historical sources. We have to be so careful, always remembering that bias is baked in. But even with that, I think Joan's voice comes through, even if it's filtered through the people questioning her.
I'd love to hear more about that. What stands out to you specifically about what Joan said? What does it tell us about, her personality, what she was going through?
Well, several things, actually. First, that unwavering conviction. We've talked about it, but it's worth repeating. She never backed down from those claims of divine guidance, even when facing torture, even death. That kind of steadfastness. It's amazing, especially for someone so young.
Yeah. And we talked about how that resonated with people in France looking for a savior. But I'm also struck by, her intelligence. She's witty. You can see it even in these dry transcripts. She doesn't just answer. She pushes back, turns their questions around, uses wordplay to avoid, saying something that could get her in trouble for heresy.
Exactly. She was sharp, able to keep up with theologians, with legal experts. Remember that exchange about God's grace?
Oh, yeah.
If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me. Brilliant.
It is. She doesn't give a straight answer,
Yeah.
which they could have used against her. But she reaffirms her faith, right? That takes, serious guts and brains to do that, especially in that situation.
It also shows the power imbalance. Here's Joan, illiterate peasant girl. being grilled by these powerful men who control basically the language of the court. They're trying to use her own words against her, but she often outmaneuvers them.
It's like a verbal deal.
It is.
Fighting for her life, but also fighting to control her own story.
Darn.
And it's just sad.
Yeah.
Because in the end, her words, they weren't enough.
No, they weren't. Which really shows how rigged it was against her.
Wow.
From the start. The court, they wanted her guilty, and they got what they wanted. Didn't matter how well she spoke, or if what she said was true.
So what was it all about then? What was behind this need to condemn her? Was it, I don't know, just politics?
Mm-hmm.
Or was there something more, or maybe a fear of what Joan actually represented?
I think it's a mix of things. Definitely politics was a big part, getting rid of Joan, this symbol of French, resistance that served the English and the Burgundians. But there was also, I think, this deeper discomfort with her saying God was talking to her, especially coming from, a young woman with no formal education.
You're saying there was like a layer of misogyny to it?
I think it's hard to deny she was challenging the system, the political order, but also the way society was structured. Patriarchal, her claims, her leading the army, her clothes, it all threatened how things were supposed to be. And that probably made them even more determined to shut her up.
And they did, in the end. Joan was condemned, burned at the stake in 1431. It's a rough ending to an incredible story. But even after she died, she didn't just disappear. She's become even more important over time.
Right. That's one of the most interesting parts. She's condemned, executed, but then she becomes a martyr, a symbol of courage, faith, and standing up to oppression. People still find inspiration in her story all over the world, even today.
I think it's because of that mystery around her. Was she really hearing from God? Or was she, I don't know, really good at using the language of religion to get what she wanted? A visionary leader or a pawn in a bigger game? These are questions we're still asking centuries later.
And those unanswered questions, they're part of what keeps her story alive. They make us think critically, examine the evidence, consider different perspectives. Joan reminds us that history isn't about easy answers. It's about sitting with ambiguity, wrestling with complicated motives, and understanding that the past is never really, truly settled.
It's also a reminder that one person, even someone who seems powerless, can change the course of history. Joan's story shows us the power of believing in something and the never-ending fight for justice, for freedom.
Absolutely. Joan challenges us to look at our own assumptions, to question what we've been told, to see how power shapes our understanding of the past. It's a story that still speaks to us, makes us debate, makes us think, and inspires new generations to fight for what they believe in, even when the odds are stacked against them.
We've only just scratched the surface of this incredible moment in history, but I hope this deep dive is giving you a new way to see Joan of Arc's trial and how powerful her story still is. Until our next deep dive, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep trying to understand the past, because when we do that, we understand ourselves and the world we live in a little bit better.